Welcome everyone to Fruits of the Orchard. Today we are going to be learning Parshat Mishpatim. This is the parsha that comes after Parshat Yitro, when we receive the Torah at Sinai. And the Sefer HaChinuch, it's a book that goes through all 613 mitzvot according to the Rambam, Maimonides, and he counts 53 different mitzvot in this parsha. There's only one other parsha that has more mitzvot, and that is Parsha Ki Teitzei, that has 74 mitzvot. So between these two portions is 25% of all the mitzvahs in the Torah. So obviously, Parshat Mishpatim is a very, very important parsha. They're all important, but here there's so many mitzvot, and these mitzvot span the full spectrum of Jewish law and Jewish worldview. There are mitzvahs between God and people, and there's mitzvah between people and people. There are agricultural laws, there are laws of the holidays, more ritualistic laws. There are many, many, many laws that have to do with a court system and how to address differences and disagreements between people. A lot of boss and worker relations, and a lot about damages that are done either mostly inadvertently, but also the laws of premeditated murder and not premeditated murder. In other words, the whole gamut of Jewish law is here in this parsha, and coming right after the giving of the Ten Commandments. So that's these general ideas. And Parshat Mishpatim begins the whole process that really the rest of the Torah will be involved with, is giving over the details of how to live a Jewish life according to the Torah. Rashi makes a very important comment. The first verse is Ve'elo mishpatim asher tasim lifnehem. These are the judgments that you shall put before them. And so Rashi says, very important Rashi, God speaks to Moshe and says, don't think that it's enough just to tell the people 2 or 3 times what to do until they, let's say, memorize what to do, how to do the mitzvah. And you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to involve yourself in explaining the meanings of the mitzvah and even the deeper meaning of the mitzvah. So God says, don't think that. Rather, you should put the laws before them like a set table. And in the Rashi, the words for the set table are Shulchan Aruch, which later was adopted by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who compiled the Shulchan Aruch in the mid-1500s, which is still the backbone of Jewish law to this day. So this is a very, very important Rashi, that even though if we read through this parsha and many other parshas, it doesn't tell us the reasons for mitzvot. It just tells us what the mitzvah is, what to do. And God says to Moshe, don't think that that's enough. You have to give over the deeper meanings, and that's where the oral Torah comes in. So we're going to do 2 articles from Fruits of the Orchard, for those who have the book. The first one is on page 201, and it's called Peace, Truth, and Compromise. So there's a big debate in the Talmud, in a number of different places, as to what is the purpose of a court system. What is the purpose of judgment? Is it to find the truth, or is it to make peace? In other words, to find compromise between people. Now, at first, we might think, well, this might be a contradiction between truth and compromise. And sometimes, actually, it may be. So that's why there's this whole debate. What's more important? Getting to the truth of a matter, especially when there are disagreements between people? Or is there the role of the judge in the court system is to try to make peace between people, and even when there's vast disagreement, to try to find a place where both disputants can walk out of court and feel good, feel that a compromise was made. Now, there are limits to everything, and the conclusion is that it's always best to try to find peace and compromise between people, and only if it just is not going to work because one or both of the sides basically refuses any kind of compromise, then the court will go towards the truth. Now, obviously, there are many, many exceptions to this. I would say, especially in criminal law, where, let's say, it's murder, which is discussed in this parsha, between purposeful murder and what's called now manslaughter, first degree, second degree, third degree, where it was not done on purpose, but there is some culpability. And so there are times, of course, we have to get towards the truth as well. They're not a contradiction, as we'll see. So the Baal HaTurim brings a very, very interesting Roshei Tevot, where he takes the first letters of those opening words of this parsha, Be'ela HaMishpatim Asher Tasim Lifnehem. So he takes the word HaMishpatim, and he makes a series of he makes an acronym, and so you spell HaMishpatim, He, Mem, Shin, Pei, Tet, Yud, Mem, and he says that each one of those letters will begin a word. It's called Notirokon, and it spells out Hadayan Mitzaveh Sheyaseh Pshara Terem Yaseh Mishpat. So the Baal HaTurim, based on the conclusion of the Gemara, even though, like I said, there are many exceptions and it's not black and white, but the thrust is to make peace. And one of the reasons we know that is every week when we read the Torah, and publicly, and we put the Torah back in the ark, so we say, Eitz Chaim hi l'machazikim ba. The Torah is a tree of life for those who grasp onto it. V'kol netivotecha shalom. All of its ways are pathways of peace. And because it is such an important thing that the Torah is described, that all of its pathways are peace, so obviously, if we set up a court system and judges in order to make judgment, then it also should lean towards, whenever possible, to making compromise and peace between people. So that's the hint that the Baal HaTurim found in the letters of the word judgments, is again that the judge is commanded to attempt a compromise before he attempts to make strict judgment. So that's a beautiful hint from the Baal HaTurim. So to explore this a little bit deeper, so we see that throughout Jewish tradition, especially in the Talmud, where we have these incredible discussions between the sages over hundreds of years about every aspect of Jewish law and tradition and custom. And inevitably, there will be disagreements. And sometimes on one matter of law, you could have anywhere from 2 to 6 or 7 different opinions of what the law should be. Ultimately, we have to pick one of the opinions to live by. We can't live by all the different opinions. But the sages coined a phrase about these differing opinions, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. In other words, even if we chosen one of the opinions, and that is going to be the normative halacha for all generations, nonetheless, we don't discard the other opinions. And that's why the Talmud records all the discussions, and not only just opinions, but the reasoning behind the opinions. And so, like I said, even if we choose one of the pathways, Jewish law is called halacha, which means to walk. We choose one of the ways to walk in, to follow the normative law. We still maintain and record all of the opinions because there's going to be a little bit of truth in all of the opinions. So a classic example of this is the disagreements between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. And these preceded many, many, many other disagreements. But there was a school of Shammai and a school of Hillel. And except for a handful of times, the law is always according to Beit Hillel. And yet the sages say an amazing thing. They say in the future, in the Messianic era, the halacha will be like Shammai. So we could ask, well, how does that work? In other words, for thousands of years, we follow Hillel, and then all of a sudden we're going to follow Beit Shammai. These are all the opinions that we didn't choose, we discarded. So what is revealed here is that even though we did not choose Beit Hillel, there's truth in his opinions. There's a worldview, there's an attitude behind his reasoning for the mitzvah. And therefore they can make this comment that in the future will go according to the opinions of Beit Shammai. Now, another place we see the idea of taking more than just one side is virtually every mitzvah has what's called in English the ideal way to perform the mitzvah. And in various circumstances where we can't do it the ideal way, it's still acceptable if we do it in a different way. In Hebrew, this is called lechatchila, meaning in the first instance. Ideally, initially, we should always try to observe the mitzvot according to we'll call it the way that the sages mapped out for us as the most ideal way. But we all know there's so many circumstances in life which does not allow us to do the mitzvah in the most perfect way or in the most ideal way. And that's called bidiavad or bidievad, where we still perform the mitzvah and fulfill the mitzvah, even though we didn't do it in the ideal way, but we did it in a way that's acceptable. So here we see this is really a kind of a proof of those who look at the Torah as being totally black and white. Just this is what the law says, this is how you do it, but it's really not like that. There are ideas of black and white and all that connotes, but there's so much gray because every person is different. Circumstances are always changing. The generations change. Circumstances change. And we don't always find ourselves in an ideal situation. In other words, actually, most of life, we don't necessarily find ourselves in the perfect circumstances to do a mitzvah in the most perfect way. We should always strive to, that is for sure. But the fact that in any book of law, it tells us what is the lachatchila way. And then in most cases it mentions, but if you can't do it that way, here are the other ways that you could do it and still fulfill the mitzvah. And one other idea that is very, very prevalent, again, we'll choose, or the sages or the rabbis choose a certain opinion or a certain way to do the mitzvah. But like we said, there's so many other opinions. So many, many, many times when a law is being explained, either orally or in a book, it will tell us what the law is, but it will also explain that the way that we do the mitzvah is in a way that we're also taking into consideration the other opinions. And this happens very, very often, where the final decision of how to keep the law takes into consideration the other opinions and, in a sense, adjusts the final version in order that there's a space for the other opinions, even though they weren't fully accepted. So that's a long, complicated discussion depending on the mitzvah, but just knowing that that's part of how Jewish law is conceived and is fulfilled is very, very important. So now, continue with the idea of finding compromise. So Rabbi Ginsburg has a book called Awakening the Spark Within, 5 Dynamics of Leadership That Could Change the World. And I had the great privilege to work with him on this book very, very closely. And we don't have time to go into it, but the first of the 5 dynamics of leadership is the art of compromise. Because the difference between a true leader and what we'll call a dictator or a despot or a strong armed leader is, in those cases, whatever the king says, whatever the dictator says, that's what it is, right or wrong, moral or not moral, ethical or not ethical. What they decide, that's what happens in that kingdom, because they are ruling by force. It's not by consent. And so the art of compromise as the first dynamic of a true leader is a leader who looks not just for compromise, but he looks for empowerment, to make people feel, whether this is in a business or a community or in religious matters and secular matters, in the professions, whatever it is, family, however we want to apply this, that a leader is always looking to empower people, even though they're the leader, they're the one on top, and they make the ultimate decisions. But the way that a true leader is making decisions is by including people in the decision-making process. And it's called inclusiveness, making people feel a part of the whole. And even though people will accept who the boss is or who the leader is, but when it's done with consent, it's such a different feeling. And of course, this is at least in principle, in ideal world, the difference between totalitarianism and democracy, where a totalitarian society is being ruled by above solely. It's not really taking anyone's opinions in mind, unless it helps them continue having power. But in a democracy, at least in principle, it's everyone has their opinion and everyone has their vote, and there's more of a feeling of inclusiveness. So in this book of Rav Ginsburg's, when he's talking about the art of compromise, he goes much, much deeper into explaining the primordial roots of what compromise is about and the importance of compromise. And for that, he actually goes back into Torah Kabbalistic cosmology and explains that when God wanted to create the world, so he looked into the Torah and he created the world. And the Torah begins with a big bet. And bet is the number 2. And this symbolizes the idea that before creation, there's only the oneness of God. That's all there is. Creation means that there's now, as it were, an other. There's now duality. There's now a bipolar world where there's spiritual and there's physical, there's godliness, and there's the reality that we all live in, and all the hundreds, if not thousands, of opposites that make up our existential context in which we live. Everything is made up of opposites. And so Rav Ginsburg says that this is inherent in creation. God knew what he was doing. So he created the world beginning with a bet. This signifies that now there's not just the oneness of God, there's multiplicity. And he says that this is the symbol of the 2 trees in the Garden of Eden. There's a tree of life, and there's a tree of knowledge of good and evil. Of course, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is based on one of the opposites, good and evil. But the tree of life is based on unification. And this is one of the basics of all Jewish thought, is that even though we do live in a dualistic world, and we do have to make choices between what is forbidden and what is permitted, what is impure and what is pure, what are the 6 days of the week and what is Shabbat. All of the different havdalahs that we make, that's the ceremony at the end of Shabbos, where we now separate between Shabbat and we go back into the week. So there's all of these separations, all of these divisions, all of these opposites. But underlying beneath, around all of the opposites, all of the dualities of the world, there is still the oneness of God. The oneness of God permeates all of creation, all of reality. And our task is to live in a world of duality, but to always be seeing, seeking, and trying to understand the oneness between everything. And this is the idea that when God told Adam and Chava not to eat, actually he only told Adam told Chava not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So it's brought down that actually that was until Shabbat. In let's say God's ideal plan, when Shabbat came, they would have been able to eat first from the tree of life and then the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But because they ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil before they even had a chance to eat from the tree of life, they got caught in this dualistic worldview. Because good and evil, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in a sense, the ideal plan would have been that they would have eaten from the tree of life, which is the consciousness of unity. And then they would have been able to see through the veneer, the superficiality of all of the opposites and dualities, and see the oneness that unites all of them. So, for example, we see in the word for heaven, the word for heaven in Hebrew is shamayim, and we're told that it's shin, and then the word mayim. Shin is the word for eish, fire, and mayim is the word for water. So here in this world, fire and water are total opposites, where water will put out fire, and fire can make water evaporate. So in this world, they are, in a sense, an archetypal type of opposite. But in heaven, fire and water coexist perfectly. And this is the secret of the Magen David, where you have 2 points of a triangle, 2 opposites that unite in their source. Or the triangle that goes down in the Magen David, you have 2 opposites, and they unite in their source. And then those 2 are linked together. And so we see that the idea of, let's say, physical and spiritual, soul and body. So in one hand, we could look at them as just total opposites, but our task, our purpose in this world is to unify physical and spiritual, the body and the soul, and in a sense to see the oneness in all opposites. So just to end this part, there's a beautiful verse in Psalms, the 85th Psalm, verses 11 and 12, Tehillim, Pei, and verses Yud Aleph and Yud Bet. And it says like this in English: kindness and truth have met, righteousness and peace have kissed. Truth will sprout from the earth, and righteousness will look down from heaven. So these verses, in a sense, is a summary of everything that we've learned. That even though we could look at the role of justice as being either finding truth or finding peace, making peace, but that isn't necessarily have to be opposites, where ultimately truth and peace will kiss. And as the verse says, that kindness and truth have met, righteousness and peace have kissed. Truth will sprout from the earth, and righteousness will look down from heaven. So these are very, very beautiful verses that give us the hope and the direction that we should run our own lives, how society should work also. Again, there's a place for strict judgment, for sure. And there's also the place for compromise. And so we should all be blessed to find the place that they come together. Now, the next article that we're going to do is called The Role of Money. This is on page 205. And as we said, this week's Parsha has so much to do with money, because so many of the cases that are brought, so many of the mitzvot deal with money, how to compensate others when damages occur. And there are all kinds of damages in society today. The courts are full of litigation dealing with damages. And we should mention that so much of the world's way of looking at judgment, the way courts are set up, is so highly influenced by the Torah in general and this particular parsha. So, having said that, the Vilna Gaon came up with like a brilliant explanation of one of the things that is sometimes very misunderstood, especially if you don't have the oral tradition, because in so many of these cases that we're talking about, the Torah says an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. That is how you go about judgment. Now, if you have no oral tradition and you read that literally, well, that's what it means. And there are societies that, in a sense, interpret an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth quite literally, and dispense judgment and justice in that way. But we know from our oral tradition what it means is the compensation of an eye for an eye. In other words, if someone inadvertently causes damage to someone else in a wide range of possibilities and examples, that the compensation is money, not a literal eye for an eye and not a literal tooth for a tooth, but the value. And like I said, this has influenced so much of justice in the world, how it is dispensed. So the Vilna Gaon says, in the Torah, it says, ayin tachat ayin, shen tachat shen. So an eye for an eye. So the word for an is, in Hebrew, is tachat, meaning an eye in exchange for an eye. But literally, tachat means below. So the Vilna Gaon, in the very brilliant textual analysis, he takes the letters of ayin, the word ayin, which is I, ayin, yud, nun. And he looks at the letters, the next letters in the alphabet, or in the idea of these letters of ayin, yud, nun are tachat, are under, are below the next letter. So if you take the three letters, so the letter that comes after the ayin is a pei, the letter that comes after a yud is a chaf, and the letter that comes after the nun of ayin is a samach. And when you take those three letters and you exchange them, the order, it spells out kesef, money. So the Vilna Gaon says this is a remez, a hint in the Torah, that when it says an eye for an eye, or an eye under an eye, below, it means kesef, which is money. So this is like an amazing, brilliant analysis of the words of the Torah themselves. So here we see that so much of this parsha has to do with compensation and with money and fairness. All kinds of laws between employers and employees, trying to find fairness and trying to find fairness when someone does damage. What's a fair compensation? So the two of the letters of kesef is, the first two are chaf and samach. So the sages make another very brilliant hint and allusion to these two letters as far as not only kesef, but how to understand who a person is. How can you tell what kind of person someone is? So they say they take three different permutations of these two letters, chaf and samach. And they say you can tell a person according to his kos, his kis, and his kaas. His kos means his cup. His kis means his pocket or wallet. And his kaas means his anger. They're all based on the same two-letter gate, or the primordial root of a three-letter root of a word. So they explain that, in a sense, in modern terms, you can tell a person by the way he holds their liquor. Because some people can control their liquor, other people, the liquor controls them. And so you can tell a person's nature, a person's very being, their attributes, their personality, by how they hold liquor, and also with money, what people spend their money on. So that's the first example. The second one is kis. So this is an obvious one. How does a person deal with their money, with their wallet, their pocket? What kind of a person are they? Are they generous? Are they stingy? What kind of priorities do they have? What are they spending their money on? What's important to them? So you can tell through a person's pocketbook. And the last one is through anger, kaas. How a person deals with situations that might make a person upset or frustrated or angry. But you have some people who just get violent. You have some people who just blurt out all kinds of things that they shouldn't and sometimes regret, accusations and all kinds of blame. And other people who have perhaps a reason to be angry, but they control themselves. So here are three different permutations of the two letters of the word kesef. And in a sense, they all have to do with kesef in a way. So now we'll look at the gematria of kesef. Kesef, the gematria is 160, which equals the word selam. Selam is, like many words in Hebrew, have two opposite connotations. God created human beings b'tselem Elokim, in the image of God. So just like we saw the kos, the kis, and the kaas, the cup, the wallet, and the anger, in a sense, shows what kind of a person we're talking about. So also the way a person deals with their money, it gives us an image of who they are, what's important to them, what are their priorities, how are they manifest their inner attributes through the way that they use money. Now, tselem also means, also for the meaning image, that an idol in the Torah many times is called a tselem. It's a false image of godliness, of divinity. It's a physical image of something that has no physicality. So here we see that the word kesef equals either the ability to be b'tselem Elokim, to use our money in a good way, a generous way, a positive way, a constructive way for ourselves, our family, our community, all of Israel, for the whole world. How do we use our money? And on the opposite, we talk about that the idea of idol worship doesn't mean what it used to mean, where the entire world was seeped in idol worship. But we know that many people talk about today's idol worship is, one of them is money, that people put their trust in money, and people, in a sense, bow down to those who have money and bow down to the power of money. So this reminds us of an important teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, where in explaining about the ladder in Jacob's dream, this is the ladder that was entrenched in the earth and its head reached the heavens. And so the Baal Shem Tov said that the gematria of the word sulam, ladder, is 136, which equals a different name for money, mammon. Mammon is a different name for money, and that also equals 136. So the Baal Shem Tov says money is like a ladder. It can drive you down to the deepest, darkest, lowest place, or it can lift you and others to the highest place. It depends how it's used. It's like a ladder, the ladder that's entrenched in the earth, but its head reaches the heavens. But it's really up to us how we're using that money. Are we controlling the money, or is the money, in a sense, controlling us? So this idea of calling money mammon has a very beautiful connection, and that is on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, in the Musaf prayer, in the very, very emotional Unatana Tokef prayer. For many people, it's like the most profound part of the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur davening. And this is who will live and who will die, who by fire and who by water, and a whole list. And then at the end of the list, the whole congregation cries out, Uteshuva, Utefila, Utsadaka, Ma'avirin et Roah HaGezerah. Shuva, repentance, Tefila, prayer, and tzedakah, charity, have the power to rip up or overcome or cancel any decree. So this is, everyone just yells this out because this is like a high point of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But what's interesting, if you look in the Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur prayer books, the Machzor, above these three words, you have three other words written small. So above the word tshuva, you have the word som, which means fast, like a fast day. Above the word tefillah, you have the word kol, which means voice. And above the word tzedakah, charity, you have this word mammon. And it's pointed out that all three of these words have the gematria of 136, which equals sulam, the ladder. And so I believe in the book of Bereshit, for those who want to go back into our YouTube videos on the Parsha of the Yetze, I believe that we discuss this at great length, these three words and their connection to the ladder. I only brought this to show that this word mammon is a legitimate word for kesef, and it has the same idea that giving charity, we're told in the Talmud that charity can overcome even a decree of death. And it has that power. That's why in Jewish tradition, so many times when if someone is sick, chas v'shalom, or in danger, we give tzedakah in their name with the hope that this will avert the decree or overcome the decree. So I just want to end with an important statement about our own time, is that through the exile, so it's somewhat ironic, but because of the way that Jews related with all the nations where we ended up, for generation after generation, there were many Jews who were very poor, extremely oppressed, could only hold certain jobs, could only live in certain places, had a hard time putting food on the table. And at the same time, there were always Jews with a lot of money. And because of that, a lot of nations or empires or districts would invite Jews in, because they not only did they have money, but they had expertise in so many different fields. So there was this dichotomy happening in Jewish society, and even the way that non-Jews treated Jews. So in today's contemporary world, of course, there are still Jews who are struggling to make a parnasa and are below the poverty line. But in great measure, in the last few hundred years, since the ghetto walls started coming down and Jews could interact with society, Jews have risen in almost every society where they find themselves, in their professions, in politics, in law, in science, in philosophy, in medicine, pretty much you name it. But also we have, and that's, there's nothing wrong with having money, absolutely nothing wrong. As we said, it's how do we use it? But there's also a phenomenon, unfortunately, of many times Jews who do have money, and they don't always attain it or use it in ethical, moral, or legal ways. And this is true of all peoples in all generations. But here we're talking about Parshat Mishpatim, and we're talking about the whole Torah that makes it very, very clear that any money that is acquired has to be done in a legal way, in a moral way, an ethical way, a fair way. And so unfortunately, sometimes in modern contemporary societies, when Jews don't do it, So it really leaves a bad name, not just for Jews, but for the Torah itself. And so this parsha, like many other parshas in the Torah, many other mitzvot, are always emphasizing the importance of how acquiring our livelihood has to be done in a fair way, in a way of morality and ethics. And halavai would be so. Halavai, that we could be an example to the world. And like I said, unfortunately, every once in a while, someone is caught not doing it exactly the right way. If they were just individuals, it would be one thing, but Jews are judged many times by a higher standard. And so when a Jew acts unethically, so it reflects on the Torah, it reflects on all the Jewish people. So this is something we should all be very, very careful of, and we should use our money wisely. We should, like the ladder, we should use the money in a way that it reaches the heaven. We do good things with our money. We help people out. We try to be as generous as we can. And there are many, many mitzvahs in the Torah that not only encourage us, but it's a law. In other words, giving charity in the Torah is not an option. It's a mitzvah. It's a commandment on an individual and on communities. There are many, many laws of the obligations of the community to those who have less, to those who are more unfortunate or have a hard time making a parnasa. In the language of the Torah, the poor, the widow, and the orphan. These are just examples of those who might be in a situation where they need help from individuals and the community. And so, therefore, we should use our money wisely. It should reflect who we are and what our morals and ethics are, our personality, our attributes, and we should do only good.